Good morning, everyone. We are so excited that you're here with us today to learn a little bit more about BloomBoard and some of the fantastic things that they're doing right here in Metro Atlanta, right here in our state, to help grow your own teachers in your districts. We all know that there is we're under a bit of a crisis right now, looking for educators and people who are interested in going into the field of education. And so we're always interested here at Metro RESA in partnering with amazing people who can help us in that department and who can help you in that area as well. And I'm so excited to see all of you. My name is Leanne Putman, and I'm the executive director here at Metro RESA. I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Angelica Collins, who is the HR director in DeKalb County Schools here in our service area at Metro RESA, and Jason Lange, president and co-founder of BloomBoard Incorporated. I'm so excited for all of you to meet them today and listen to a little bit more about how they're partnering to do exactly what I just described. Dr. Collins and Jason will talk a little bit about DeKalb's implementation of BloomBoard's DOL, the Department of Labor Registered Teacher Apprenticeship Program, and how the BloomBoard team supported DeKalb in receiving funding from the state for their registered apprenticeship program. Before I turn it over to Dr. Collins and Jason, I'd like to share a little bit more about each of their organizations, as well as the funding opportunity that they'll be talking about today. That's one part that we're really excited to share with you today, is some funding opportunities that are out there for you to do exactly what they have done and be able to replicate that in your own district. DeKalb County Schools has 14 teacher candidates who are currently enrolled in their teacher apprenticeship program. These paraprofessional candidates are working toward earning their bachelor's in elementary education or special education, and they're earning a teaching certificate in the same area. All candidates will be fully certified DeKalb County teachers of record starting with the 26-27 school year. That is so exciting, guys, and we can't wait to hear more about it. BloomBoard supports DeKalb County in realizing their talent development strategy by identifying funding opportunities and initiating the district in securing and administering those funds to drive down costs, by supporting the district with selection, application, and enrollment process for candidates who are interested in becoming part of the program, supporting the preparation and training of mentor and school building leaders to support those candidates, and providing ongoing mentoring of degree and certification process. So every step of the way, they're right beside you, making sure that everyone is being successful in their efforts. And that's exciting news and amazing support that's provided by BloomBoard. Specifically, BloomBoard and DeKalb will share a little bit more with us today about the process for joining their registered teacher apprenticeship program that enables districts to apply for the state's high demand apprenticeship program, or HDAP, formerly the High Demand Career Initiative. With BloomBoard support, DeKalb will receive funding of up to $10,000 for 5 of their teacher candidates, and BloomBoard will continue to work with DeKalb to pursue and secure this funding for future cohorts. And so again, they're right there with you all through the process, every step of the way. And so without taking up any more time, again, thank you so much for being part of this call today. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Collins and Jason Lange. Thanks, guys, so much for being with us this morning.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate all the help and all the support. You all have been a great partner, and we're excited about all the work ahead. Nice to meet y'all. I'm Jason Lange. I'm the founder president for BloomBoard. I think Dr. Collins is stuck in the Zoom technology sort of purgatory moment at the time, so she'll be joining us in a second here. But I can certainly kick us off, and then we'll sort of have a bunch of questions for her. And I know making sure you all sort of get her perspective and sort of how things have been playing out is pretty helpful. I thought it'd be helpful just to start off just in terms of, like, as we think about the work, let me sort of share my screen. As we think about the work, it'd be helpful to just give you a little better sense of like what we're actually doing and what does this sort of term teacher apprenticeship mean? And it's been thrown around a whole bunch of different places in different ways. And so I want to give a little bit of sense of like, what is this idea of how do we sort of create more on the job degree pathways, which is a pretty big shift at the higher ed level. And so I want to make sure we sort of talk through that. make sure that's clear. And then we can dig into sort of the funding side of this, which we're now deeper into funding. We're a registered apprenticeship sponsor in a bunch of states, and we're sort of helping districts access a lot of this different sort of workforce, Department of Labor funding, different sort of sources. And so it's pretty, gnarly, but there's definitely a lot of net new funding out there available. And so I think there's a lot of excitement. It's just a question of how to help best manage that. And so that's really one of the things we're sort of excited about the partnership and excited about some of the support we can provide. The really quick background. So let's jump in. The super quick background in terms of where we are in terms of the work that we're doing is, we've been around for about 15 years. So when I started the company, the whole goal was, how do we use technology to train and scale the highest quality instruction for all kids, right? And we know that teachers are our biggest lever for sort of driving impact for kids. So how do we use technology and create better feedback, better systems for that? And all of that work, we raised millions of dollars from the Gates Foundation early on. I get to present to Bill Gates personally about the future of teaching and technology. And so that's a fascinating conversation for another time. But really the idea is, we know that this is super important in lots of different ways. And so ultimately what we've been sort of trying to figure out is, how do we do that? And then, all of a sudden, and not really all of a sudden, but then the teacher shortage really started to come into play. And so we've now collided, all of our work has sort of collided with this sort of urgency I think everyone is feeling, where attrition rates are as high as they've been, if not getting higher, and that we're running out of sub pools and para pools, and it's getting pretty sort of hard to sort of see through a lot of the vacancies that we're looking at right now. And at the same time, and probably more systemically an issue, is we're just running out of 20-year-olds to actually staff the profession. And that we really no longer, if you sort of chart today, the actual ed prep candidate pool, against our attrition rates, in the next 3, 4, 5 years, things get pretty dire in terms of being able to open schools, because many of our marquee institutions, many of our sort of longest standing sort of programs that have been producing the bulk of our teacher prep candidates are now getting into single digit or sort of tens of candidates. And those are coming from the sort of the state institutions, like the marquee institutions. And so the pool of 20-year-olds coming into the profession is getting so low that it's starting to become sort of a national crisis. And we're seeing this play out in other countries where they've started shifting to pretty draconian measures, where they're doing 2 sessions of school, 1 in the morning, and then kids go home at noon with 5 hours of homework in Germany, because they've got a second session in the afternoon, because that's the only way to manage their sort of talent pool. And so, and we've seen districts in the US start to go to 4-day work weeks and all sorts of craziness, because they're trying to sort of solve the problem. And so rather than sort of take these sort of more draconian measures, I think our lens has been, well, what if we could sort of reimagine the talent pool from within the community itself? And that this is really the big opportunity, is this idea of, we know today that there are a lot of people in your schools, in your buildings, in your communities right now that would like to be fully certified teachers. When we've surveyed now thousands of paras and subs, the data is pretty consistent. It's about 50 to 60% of those candidate pools would like to be fully certified, but frankly feel locked out of the higher ed system the way it's been designed, because it's frankly been designed for people in their 18 to 21-year-old, 22-year-old, sort of demographic. And that it's built for a sort of a generation ago that's just not convenient enough for somebody who's an adult, who's in their late 20s, early 30s, who has a family. And what we hear time and time again is, I just can't afford a degree. And even if I could afford it, I can't fit it into my life, because I can't go back and get all the credits I would need to go get, because I've got a family at home. I've got a second job because I'm working as a para making $24,000 a year. And so I just don't have time to go deal with nights and weekends courses and the like. And so the idea in our world was, well, what if we could actually wave a bit of a magic wand at the higher ed system? And what if we could really change the model to allow for it to sort of cater directly to full-time employed adults? And if we could do that, if we could change that higher ed delivery structure, all of a sudden we can open up a ton of equity and access into the pipeline. And so we now have school districts that can literally see how they get to 0 vacancies in the next 3 years. And that's a really powerful sort of incentive. They have 100-person wait lists for these programs, because there's so much demand and interest in the community to be able to get into them. And that sort of their ability to sort of create these on-the-job pathways is really sort of important. And then ultimately, we know that most of our paras, most folks in our classified staff actually match our student demographics. And so it's a really exciting way to diversify the workforce and get over some of the systemic barriers we've had to diversity and sort of in the instructional sort of roles. And ultimately, if we can use the research around residencies and all the data we know that says the more time teachers have in the classrooms, the more feedback they're getting on their actual job, the better their instruction will be. And so the idea that we can create a bachelor's degree sort of residency model is really exciting and starts to really change how we think about sort of the quality of the candidates coming in and working with our kids. And then ultimately, and obviously part of the reason we're here today is there's a bunch of new funding available to help pay for these programs and help manage, right, sort of those different sort of processes. And so that just requires some lift, particularly on our end, to help manage that. So a lot of sort of stuff that I would try to make this sort of as question QA as sort of friendly as possible. So if you have questions, there's a QA link or a QA sort of link over there that you can sort of feel free to type in. I'll monitor that while we're sort of chatting here. And if you want to sort of type them into the chat. But any questions just in terms of how we're trying to serve. And I think I saw Dr. Collins jump in. Dr. Collins, are you able to join us here?
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect. How's it going? Sorry for the
Can you
technical
hear me?
difficulties. We can.
You said we can or cannot?
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good.
Well, so Dr. Collins, I'm just sort of interested in, sort of quickly, one, we'd love for you to introduce yourself, sort of, we got sort of a pretty amazing group here. And then, I tried to kick things off, just talk a little bit about like, sort of the need we're trying to serve. So it'd be helpful if you give a little background on sort of what you all were trying to sort of serve in terms of the Ignite program and sort of the Pair to Bachelor's pathway here, and just sort of who you were trying to help serve as we sort of get in the partnership up running.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jason. And first of all, I do want to say thank you for not only the partnership, but this opportunity. Yes, for DeKalb County School District, we, of course, was in the position of where we felt like, for one, we wanted to strengthen our Grow Your Own program, as well as address some of the chronic teacher turnover and nationwide teacher shortages that we, of course, were facing. Of course, in fact, we also feel that some of the traditional routes are just producing lesser and lesser educators. And so, again, in order to try to build a teacher pipeline, and our little motto is for DeKalb, by DeKalb. We, of course, partner with BloomBoard, who is a talent development provider. And they, of course, provide us with a learning platform which afforded our employees and our target group of individuals were paras. Again, an opportunity to strengthen our Grow Your Own program. But basically, the program is a 2-year program where individuals have the opportunity to earn their bachelor's degree. Again, BloomBoard, who has been awesome partners in this work, provides us with this full pedagogy platform in collaboration with a partnership from an accredited university, which in this case, we are partnered with Point Park University out of Pennsylvania. And so, it's been a wonderful experience. BloomBoard literally has single-handedly walked us through the entire process. Our principals had an opportunity to select these individuals. Individuals have on-the-job training, embedded professional learning. I literally can go on and on, but there are mentors at the building level that serves as a pal or coach, as you will, to provide them with, just some of those on the job management type things that where they can kind of literally be self-directed on their own, but they may have a few questions or need some informal feedback and things like that. But that's kind of it in a nutshell. Jason, I'm not sure if I've kind of answered some of those pertinent things, but I do want to also add that this program just alone is, it allows for flexibility. It provides our paras the opportunity to go through real life experiences, real world experiences. It truly is a turnkey program. It's very robust. BloomBoard has a platform that the individuals have the opportunity to be engaged, not only through with BloomBoard facilitators, but also with professors from Point Park. I hope I'm not saying that backwards. um,
Love it.
but that's kind of it in a nutshell. I also want to just highlight the fact that you're talking about almost 2,800 hours worth of on-job learning and training. There is a portfolio based project that is a part of this, where individuals have to submit artifacts, utilize videos, write lesson plans, and so it's very an intense, robust program.
Tanya, I think I saw that you had a question in there, but I think I can just give you the ability to chat here. You have a question there?
Yeah, I was just asking about if somebody could talk about certification with the PSC, since the school is based in Pennsylvania. Is there any type of reciprocity that has to happen, like they're certified in Pennsylvania and then have to get reciprocity in Georgia? Like, how's that work?
Yes,
so it is.
Go ahead, Jason. You can go ahead, because I was just going to tell her absolutely that is the case. But Jason, you can speak more on that if you need to.
Yeah, it is an accredited EPP program. So all of our higher ed partners, we don't have one in state in Georgia yet. That's certainly the goal. We're certainly trying to sort of figure out if there's a sort of a good set of partners there that work. But sort of all of our partners right now are out of state. But given the way that sort of the Georgia reciprocity sort of policies work, right, they're still graduating with an approved EPP degree, and then they're taking in-state tests for the process. So we've mapped the degree against all of the actual licensure requirements to make sure that they're covering off all the content, all the science of reading, all the sort of the pieces that they need. And then they're going through and say they're taking Georgia content exams upon completion of the program. And so it's sort of still able to sort of cover off the full license, the full approval as needed, even with an out-of-state partner. And it's not different than having somebody, come to you from an EPP program out of state and then sort of being able to sort of be employed after that.
Okay, and the last question is, and Dr. Collins, usually when teachers come to us from out of state, the biggest thing that they don't have is the teaching students with disabilities course that they have to usually take out of RESA or something like that. Is that course covered with this program? Do they, is it covered in the program?
It is. Yeah, we did that. We do that mapping up front with all of our partners. So we sort of gone through and sort of gotten approval for exactly which courses. And then we've updated the sort of curriculum with the university partners to make sure we're including exactly what they need based on it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And I also want to include that also, typically, as you all know, we have to have that student teaching component, but that is also embedded in this program as well.
And so really that's sort of the crux of the idea behind our work is, right, sort of how do we sort of help think about, again, the traditional higher ed model and what does it look like to sort of shift away from something that feels, again, pretty inaccessible and inconvenient. So I always joke, like in my teacher prep world, I'm guessing many of y'all's teacher prep world, right, I've sat in a bunch of classrooms that look like this, right, which were just not, right, Stanford's a wonderful school, but at the end of the day, right, I had these old school professors who would play these videos from 30 years earlier, and he would pause the video periodically and say, all right, which student is in his or her zone of proximal development? And then we would debate ZPDs for an entire class session. And, you can plug in PJ, plug in whatever your examples are, right, from your sort of own world. But like, we know that right now, most of the teacher prep systems that exist and the courses that exist are still very theoretical and not connected to the day job of really teaching kids, which is why our retention rates coming out of alt cert programs, MAT programs, right, ed prep in general is just not great because people aren't getting the experience they need to feel comfortable in the job. And so a lot of what we've done is that rather than, I don't know how many thousands of dollars I paid for that 3-credit course, but I did because that's the game we live in. And so we said that that's no longer possible and no longer a viable pathway for adult learners that are working in our schools today. And so what would it look like, again, with that magic wand, to wave and be able to say, what if we could redesign that 3-credit course to be all about your actual day job? And what if we could take, right, the actual work that you're doing in a co-teaching, sort of almost like a student teaching on steroids assignment, where you're working alongside a co-teacher in a 1 period a day placement, and we're actually having our candidates, our paras in DeKalb, in that one period a day, they're taking their lesson plans, they're actually videotaping themselves deliver those lesson plans as the sort of co-teacher in that classroom. They're taking the student work coming out of those lesson plans, and all of those artifacts they're uploading into our system, where faculty member from our accredited partners are then providing annotated, time-stamped, one-on-one feedback on exactly what's working and what's not, and how they're actually sort of can really make sure that they're sort of meeting those kids exactly where they are. And that idea that all of a sudden we can sort of really start to change the model so that it's all about your day job and it's all about your work. It transforms that 3-credit course no longer into another thing that you have to go find time and space to complete, but it actually embeds that 3-credit course into your day job and makes it about what's going to help you tomorrow with the things that you're working on in those classrooms with your kids. Let me pause there. Any questions about that? Dr. Collins, any thoughts in terms of what you've heard from candidates in terms of that sort of portfolio-centric experience?
The only thing I would like to add, Jason, is that, just the feedback that we've received so far, they really appreciate, as I stated earlier, the flexibility. And they feel like they're getting the real life experiences. And so being able to pull artifacts from things that's really happening in the classroom, they are very appreciative of this opportunity because they're kind of going at their own pace. They have individuals that's in the building who are, they are supporting the work. They're providing guidance and feedback as well. But most importantly, they are very excited and they're pleased with the feedback, the guidance that they've received, not only from the BloomBoard partners, but also from the faculty members from Point Park University. And so just that partnership alone has been real engaging, real world, very supportive. And so we are pleased with just the minimum feedback that we have received so far.
And we do find, we now have hundreds, thousands across our master's degree programs of candidates, right, going through this. And we have a 95+ completion retention rate, which in the higher ed world is sort of astronomical in the grand scheme of things. And so we're really excited about just sort of all the ways we've been thinking through how do we support candidates in their jobs on their, right, sort of during their actual sort of assignments while they're in their placements working on those portfolios. And that what we find, right, is as if you were to try to go do this today, right, we know that there's a lot involved and that one, right, there are basically no on-the-job higher ed delivery models today, right? There's still a lot of nights and weekends, even if it's a fully asynchronous online course, there's still just a lot of extra time, nights and weekends that you have to put in terms of 3-4 hour blocks away from your family, away from your kids, right? Or away from your second job. And so we know that higher ed needs some support there. And the gap between trying to help manage all of the logistics to create these residency programs is a really heavy lift. And so the idea is, right, that we, BloomBoard, can actually, because of the way we partner with higher ed, we can sort of ease that burden and really sort of take on all of the different sort of pieces that are needed to make that transition really work well and really efficiently. And that's why we've built our world into what are the things that are really required to do that. So the first off is we have this sort of technology platform. It's basically the course level learning management system. So if you think about if you're using Canvas or Schoology, whatever you're using in your schools, Google Classroom, right? We have our own version of a learning management system for our faculty and for candidates to go through these courses. And so they're using our technology. It means we get to track every click and every sort of process that we're watching to making sure candidates have interventions and supports they need. We're also then building a lot of the residency management. So we meet with the DeKalb team every week to talk through placements, talk through, coaching, mentor sort of work. We're talking through who's on track, who's ahead, who's fallen behind, what do we need to do if we need to sort of, create some intervention sort of processes. And so we're constantly sort of monitoring and supporting those candidates to make sure they're being successful and getting what they need. And then we're making sure all of the heavy lifting for licensure is taken care of. So when do we need to fit in sort of student teaching requirements here and there? What, special ed students with disabilities sort of courses at work do we need to sort of apply for and manage, right? We're sort of constantly sort of mapping to the licensure approvals. And then, and obviously this is part of this conversation, we have a whole funding playbook, right? Which is how do we help districts access these net new funds? Because it's just a whole new world, right? The Department of Labor is not one that's super familiar with how education works, and vice versa, right? Education has not really ever had to worry about WIOA funding and incumbent worker funding. And so there's a lot of sort of Department of Labor speak on the funding side. We're sort of managing and helping create basically sort of almost like a bring our own funding support structure to the programs. And then we're helping with candidate identification and selection. And so again, as Dr. Collins mentioned, every principal filled out a recommendation survey to sort of recommend. So we're shoulder tapping candidates who we know are going to be great candidates, who we know are interested, who've already been employed in our districts, typically for 3, 4, 5, 8, 15 years, and that they've always wanted to be teachers. And now we can give them a pathway to do it on the job as part of a great coaching program. And then we're integrating that all the way back into the higher ed feedback. So, for example, one of the things we found, even with DeKalb, is in our first launch, right, we sort of got board approval in November and scrambled to get our first cohorts up in a really tight timeline. It's not what we recommend necessarily, but we were able to sort of get a pretty amazing cohort launched. But what we found initially was we didn't have as many candidates, right, that had a pure associate degree to be able to go from associate to bachelor's. And so this fall, we're going to launch a 0 to bachelor's degree that's an accelerated full 120 credit degree that you can do in 3 years. And that's a crazy amount of, right, sort of ability for us to sort of really start to help higher ed both adapt to the needs of our candidates and open up these accelerated pathways. Because if you can all of a sudden think about it as, right, if you're graduating from high school with some dual credit, all of a sudden that means you may be able to get through an entire bachelor's degree as, from a recent high school grad in 2 years, and then go work while working full-time, working for the district. And so we're seeing a lot of, especially our sort of districts where, in rural communities where they're tapping directly into their high school grads to build accelerated bachelor's degree timelines into their recent grads, because that's a way to sort of reconstitute the entire talent pool for the teachers and the shortages that we need. And so we've been sort of really excited about where that's moving in the process. And that ultimately, right, this is really about sort of changing the structure of higher ed and moving, higher ed made this big shift from in-person to online in COVID. Some folks did it before COVID, but for the most part, right, pre-COVID, we just had in-person delivery. Now there's a hybrid sort of online models where there's some online courses. Typically, it's still sort of full lectures and and that's still just unfortunately not convenient enough. And that we're helping that higher ed model move towards this sort of next generation, which is moving from online to entirely on the job. And where we can do that, we're integrating test prep into the second semester, as soon as possible for praxis exams. We're really sort of, again, focusing on that funding sort of side of it. And so it's really sort of thinking about this next generation of what the higher ed system should look like to basically be able to sort of fit directly inside of school districts in the way that you're looking at it. And frankly, being able to do it for the entire career path. And so now we have programs, everything from high school, again, high school, dual credit, high school grads into para roles. Obviously with DeKalb, we're doing the para to bachelor's work. We have MAT programs and master's degree programs that are taking candidates from bachelor's out of field to master's degrees in licensure. And then we have special ed add-ons, ESL add-ons, sort of all these areas. And we're even working on a master's in ed leadership in the process. And so that's really the sort of the construct of sort of the what this looks like. Any questions there just from a what, and then we can jump into some of the other questions on the funding side. But any other questions there? And that really then, from there, right, again, I think our goal is how do we embed this into the employer? And this is where the apprenticeship really starts to become pretty interesting. And so I know with DeKalb, right, one of the ideas was, right, we are necessarily, like, we BloomBoard, no one ever needs to know we exist. Right? At the end of the day, it's not about us. And that, right, there's no BloomBoard degrees, right? It's all our higher ed partners. And frankly, our goal is to help equip and arm our districts to fight back against Amazon and Target and Starbucks. Because now, right, if you go, I talked to a superintendent the other couple months ago that lost a special ed para to a Buc-ee's, right? And if we're losing special ed paras to fast food restaurants, like that should be a wake-up call. Like that's soul crushing in terms of what it means. But they were going to buy her a bachelor's degree and put her on a management track. And so we know that we need tools. Districts have to start to fight back against these large, massive corporate entities that are stealing our teachers. And right now, the biggest benefit that Target and Amazon and folks are using is they're actually buying bachelor's degrees for candidates. it just turns out that those are pretty inconvenient because you still have to stock shelves during the day and then go do your coursework nights and weekends. And so the idea that we can create very district-centric sort of programs. So with DeKalb, right, their sort of Ignite program, right, it is really all about DeKalb, right? This is not meant to be a BloomBoard program at all, right? This is their residency, it's their sort of program, and it's built into their pathway. And so we want to make sure that the district is really the centerpiece of, here's how we're investing in valuing our staff and valuing our community, which is why we've seen so much demand in the programs. Again, why we have 100-person wait lists right across the country in sort of other districts. And so it's a really exciting way to think about redesigning that pipeline and building it from within the community in the process for that. Any questions on that overall structure?
Jason, I do want to add, you're being a little bashful, I think, here. And I'm going to say that because you are absolutely 100% right. It is definitely for DeKalb and by DeKalb. But I cannot sit beside here and not talk about just the partnership, just the sustainability that already, even though this is our first cohort that we implemented in March, that you all have provided for us. BloomBoard has been a great partner. When I tell you that they have created playbooks, provided exceptional guidance for us, we will not be able to have launched our program off the ground if it was not for the support and the guidance of BloomBoard. And so I have to say that. And so do know that if you all take the chance to partner with BloomBoard, you will not be disappointed. They really have been a blessing to DeKalb County School District because, as I stated earlier, we have been doing numerous of things to try to strengthen our Grow Your Own program. I am sure that all Metro districts have Grow Your Own programs, but until we partnered with BloomBoard, we were not able to really have a sustainability of where we feel like we are going. And so again, I just had to add that. So thank you, Jason, and your team for the great work, the guidance and the support that you have provided the DeKalb County School District.
Really appreciate it. Yeah, it's been, I mean, obviously this is a super interesting time to see how this all plays out. And I think we're only, what's funny is we've actually seen, and even our sort of first cohort's only 14, 15 candidates, what we've started to see is there's just so much pent up demand. In South Bend, we launched and had a couple of candidates to start, and now they had 90 candidates sign up for their most recent sort of lift. We had in Palm Beach in Florida, right, and in Orange County in Florida, we have sort of 100+ folks sort of signing up for these sort of info sessions. So it's a really interesting time, and there's just a ton of demand that we often find just currently isn't really being served because, right, most of your candidates probably feel like there's not a path for them to do it, and it feels pretty disheartening, and it just doesn't feel like it's going to work for them. And so that's sort of the big sort of questions on the what. I think now we get into sort of some of the meat of this. How can we, when we know that these are new, and we know that districts have some level of credit reimbursement or sort of funding to help sort of pay for some of these programs. But really, at the end of the day, the question is, how do we help sustainably fund this work post-COVID, right, post-ESSER sort of dollars? And what does that look like? And so we've spent a whole bunch of time and have a whole sort of playbook on funding around how do we sort of manage this. And I would say it's actually a little bit higher level lens, which is one, like we also push a lot on higher ed to reduce the tuition costs, right? We know tuition has been out of control for a long time. And so we're constantly trying to sort of reduce the total cost and the total tuition. And at the same time, we also know most of your candidates actually have a ton of credit. But part of the problem that exists today is the transfer credit options are really limited and really frustrating for most candidates because even if you've got a hodgepodge of 40, 50 credits, you might only get 10 or 20 credits, right, sort of available to you, right, as a transfer option into a program. And so we spend a lot of time pushing on our higher ed partners to really try to be as flexible, as generous with sort of transfer credit as possible, knowing that candidates are coming from all over the place in the process. And then, right, we make sure that every candidate has to apply for FAFSA. has to apply for sort of as much of the sort of various sort of state, federal aid options that are available to them, because we know that's another really helpful, right, sort of place to be able to sort of help get funding from outside sources. And then finally, right, and the big sort of crux of this conversation is, what can we do to really proactively pursue additional non-education funding sources? And so the obviously the one that we sort of initially started about and talked about here, right, the $50,000 we were able to sort of help sort of get for DeKalb is around this high demand apprenticeship program. And so that program itself, and if you haven't been to the actual website, it's here, it's hosted through the Technology System of Georgia. So you can sort of just go to this web link. I can put this in the chat if you want to take a look. Everyone. And that this link basically has sort of the update on sort of what is this program designed for. And again, you'll notice this does not feel, right, teacher-centric. This is really sort of apprenticeship-centric. But 2 years ago, teaching was put on the apprenticeshipable occupations list by the Department of Labor. And so all of a sudden now teaching is an eligible pathway to be able to sort of go through the process, stand up an apprenticeship, get access to this funding. And what we find is that especially for medium to smaller districts, the paperwork and the reporting itself is frankly just pretty painful. And that it's really sort of, unless you're sort of managing it at scale and managing it across multiple employers, that's why we are the actual apprenticeship sponsor in the state of Georgia, right? Going through that application process, and that we can then add districts, and then all of the reporting and management is on us. And that makes it much easier for folks to be able to access these sort of dollars and these funding sources, and that we're then helping write the applications. We'll write another round of applications for a couple of other folks right now. Obviously, we'd love to have more come July to be able to sort of tap into those funds. I know the first round of funding, they didn't get through all of the funds, and so they rolled those into the second year. And so there's definitely availability of the dollars to help pay for the programs. And then there was just a new update. So a new bill just passed in the General Assembly that sort of updated the name and changed the structure. So it used to be in the first round, we had $10,000 per apprentice with DeKalb for getting the $5,000 for their sort of program. The sort of apprentice changed to $5,000 per apprentice for 10 apprentices per employer. And so that changes a little bit of the structure in terms of how you go about, or how we would go about sort of helping you get that. And again, we're trying to sort of make sure we sort of cover off all these different sort of priority issues in terms of, right, sort of making sure that it's really connected to public service in the process. And this is one area where, we write the application. Now we can add folks to our application, to our sponsorship in a pretty easy way. And it's a way for us to sort of help fund those programs as one source of funding in the process. And so if I were to add to that, right, again, there's always new different options. So in addition to the apprenticeship program, the HDAP work, there's a bunch of new, what's called incumbent worker training dollars. This is more of a local conversation with your workforce board about that structure that we can sort of have and that we're having with other districts that are able to fund through incumbent worker trainings. There's other sources of funding around sort of apprenticeship set-asides or other WIOA funding and other things that we can sort of talk about at a deeper level. And then ultimately, right, our goal is to position the districts really to be sort of the payer of last resort. And so a lot of this is about how do we then get creative in terms of, funding sources, whether it's lap salary associated with sort of your long-term sub sort of staffing, whether it's title funding for special ed degree pathways, right, ESL sort of pathways, whether it's salary holdbacks, right, once a candidate's, going from making our average is probably, our candidates go from making $24,000 a year to $55,000 a year. And so some of our districts say, well, if I can hold back some of that, sort of that additional salary, it's a way to make the program evergreen sustainable in the process. So there's just a lot of ways to get creative about sort of sustainability. And to give you an example of sort of how that sort of often plays out, the way we typically look at this is, how do we sort of think about sort of the difference between what are you currently budgeting for fully staffed sort of classrooms, and what are you paying, whether it's in release, sort of sub pools, whether it's provisionally licensed educators, what's the difference between what you're paying folks that are actually on the ground in, non-fully staffed classrooms? And that general fund savings is often what we're using, right, in that lap salary category. That's what we're using to try and put pressure on higher ed as much as possible to say we need the tuition to be lower than this total amount. and that's what helps make these sort of processes. And so that's what we've typically been able to get to. But that's also before a bunch of these federal subsidies, other sort of aid, sort of systems. And so a lot of the way we tend to think about the funding side of this work is, how do we braid this different set of funding together to drive this cost down as much as humanly possible, and basically make it, the cheapest out of pocket for the district, so that the candidates are paying zero or very little out of pocket, which is most of our candidates in the programs, and that we still have an expected candidate contribution as part of that, but we want to try and go get access and help candidates go get access to as much of that other grant funding that's available. So every candidate applies for Pell, applies for FAFSA. Again, most of our candidate pool, because of where they're coming from and because of life circumstance, tends to be pretty heavily Pell eligible. And so we set sort of our candidate contribution as the national average, which we can talk about in a second here. On top of that, there's these sorts of apprenticeship grant sort of programs. And so the HDAP program directly fits into this bucket as well. How do I help not only sort of access this sort of Pell funding, but how do I access some of this apprenticeship dollars? And what does that look like in terms of other WIOA incumbent worker funding sources? And then finally, what's the district level support that might fit on top of that? And how do we make that really work in the process? And so out of the gate, so any questions just on the funding pools and the way we think about sort of braided funding across these different buckets? I know there's a lot here, but I want to make sure that we're sort of getting through the meat of, I'm sure, what y'all were interested in. Okay. And so just to get into some, some examples, right? The idea is, right, as we've been going through this, if we were just setting up an expected candidate contribution at 4,100, which is that national average, right? That means the remaining funding support would typically be, right, to cover the rest of the degree, would typically be 9,400. But if we can add in some of that workforce funding, and if we can use our RESA partners to help aggregate some of the cohorts, right, all of a sudden we're able to start to drive the cost to the district down to about $5,000, which, if you could imagine restaffing and rebuilding your entire talent pool for $5,000 a candidate, that they're going to then stay for 3 to 5 years based on our retention MOUs, and they've gone to your schools, they live in your schools, they have housing, right? All of a sudden, that's a pretty amazing ROI in terms of investment to rebuild and reconstitute the entire teacher pipeline. And that's even just sort of with the current funding available. We have other districts that we're working through where the bulk of their entire sort of program will be funded by outside capital sources. And so that's really the sort of the goal is, how do we think about what can we fund using current dollars? What are additional dollars that we can go after to be able to sort of help fund these programs? And what does it look like to embed this in as many of the sources of funding that you currently have access to? And how do we help make that really sort of compelling to not only meet your candidates where they are in terms of their degrees on the job, but also how do we then help you fund it as much as possible from other sources, knowing it's just a tough time given post-ESSER in terms of how we're sort of managing sort of staffing and how we're managing the funding sources going forward. Any other questions that'd be helpful? I know we can open it up to Q&A. This is really sort of the bulk of the work, but I want to make sure we can sort of talk through any questions y'all have and really sort of get into what that looks like. Or if there's other questions y'all want to sort of work through, we can figure that out as well. If there are no other questions, then certainly, again, you can sort of feel free. I know we'll send a follow-up. I think we'll send a recording of the video if you want to share it out with your staff. So we'll send a recording of the webinar. If you want to reach me, I'm always happy to chat and share and sort of connect with folks on our team if there's helpful sort of questions about different sort of pathways, licensure, and the like. I'm just Jason at BloomBoard. But otherwise, we're really excited about the work, super excited about the partnership with Metro RESA and DeKalb, and really sort of looking forward to seeing where this goes. And how we can sort of continue to sort of build more sustainable, right, sort of community-based programs to support the future of the pipeline. And that we're really excited about the success we've had, and know George is going to be a pretty amazing sort of partner and sort of focus for us going forward. So we're really excited about the work.
And thank you so much, Jason and Dr. Collins, for sharing your experience in DeKalb and how BloomBoard is supporting districts really around the country in developing grow your own programs as another solution. There are lots of ways that educators come into our districts and into the profession, and this is another way to meet the needs that you have and give people some opportunities that might not have existed for them before for a lot of different reasons. And so we appreciate your innovation and your creativity in making this happen for districts and especially here in the state of Georgia. So thank you, Jason. Thank you, Dr. Collins. And thank you to all of you who have been on the call today. We really appreciate your attendance and are grateful for your time this morning and hope that you have a fantastic finish to your day.
And it actually looks like we had a couple of questions come in.
Great.
While we started talking here, so we can sort of go through those. The grant applications are due. So the next round opens up in July. And so there's a sort of a little bit about a grant addendum sort of process, but we can sort of help with that. But they sort of open up in July, which is why we wanted to sort of schedule this here to be able to talk about what that looks like, what sort of cohorts, again, what vacancies, what sort of roles you're trying to fill. And that we would then be able to sort of submit with you or for you in July, or you can submit yourself in the process in that sort of July timeframe once it opens back up. So I think we talked through that one. There's a question from Paige in terms of, have you been doing this long enough to have teachers who've completed and are now certified? We actually have our first graduating class from our bachelor's. We have lots of folks who've gone through master's degrees and gotten licensed in other states. And so at the alt-cert master's degree, MAT sort of add-on level, we have thousands of teachers who've gone through that. And I think our advancement or completion retention rate is 92+% for those folks. For our bachelor's degree program, the folks at the DeKalb folks are in, we have our first graduating cohort this fall. It'll be 100% graduation, which we're super excited about in the program. And again, our completion rates semester over semester are 95+% for our bachelor's folks. So we've been really excited about just the level of engagement and the candidate sort of engagement. And obviously we're doing as much as we can to make sure we're sort of supporting and scaffolding that work to get folks what they need. Dr. Collins, there's a question in here. Are you available to speak to other district leaders? Can you share your contact information? Again, I would say happy to do that. What department at the district level should leave this conversation for a possible partnership? Typically, we find it's mostly HR or talent acquisition in the sort of process. And so anybody in sort of the talent recruitment world, right, or anybody who's dealing with sort of grow your own programs, right, typically that's easier in the HR side of the house because of some of the, the job description sort of role classification issues. And so we're happy to sort of connect with those folks. But yes, Doug Collins, I'll let you sort of talk through.
Yes. Let me make sure I'm okay. Yes. As far as my contact information, I'll be more than happy to either email it. Do we have a list of the participants?
Yep.
Yes. So we'll make sure that you all get all of that information so that you can reach out and please know that I am available or I'm very accessible for you all as well as if you would like to come to DeKalb to visit, to walk through, to visit a school where an individual is going through the program, we are more than happy to be able to support and to assist you in whatever way possible. So please know that as well.
And then we'll also share out a link to the presentation, to the slides, and again, to the recording as well. So we'll do that and sort of follow up. I can make sure you all have a copy of the presentation. Cool. Any other questions that would be helpful? And then hi, Leanne. Angie.
Yeah.
All right. Well, given how busy things are, and I know getting any time back, but 9 minutes back feels like a win. So we thank you all for the time. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Dr. Collins. Really appreciate the time and all the support. We're super excited about the work ahead. So thanks for all your.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much. Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Today.
Take care.
Bye-bye.